This is going to be your stepmom, Julia. Sasha, meet Julia, my daughter. My dad said. I looked at him surprised, then I looked at Sasha. She looked young under all the makeup, but I knew she was around 30 years old. My dad told me that he has been seeing someone for a while now, but I never knew it was serious. At 20, I knew I didn't need a mother like other kids would since I was all grown up. My dad looked happy though, smiling at Sasha like I wasn't in front of them. I extended my hand for a handshake, but Sasha pulled me in for a hug. Her perfume clouded my nostrils. "We're going to be best buddies, Julia," she said, her voice sounding so high-pitched. I winced and smiled back. I told my dad I was happy for him and welcomed Julia to the family. She moved in with us barely 2 weeks later. They had a court wedding the week before and went on a honeymoon in Rio. My dad stayed at home for 1 more week, saying that he was his own boss and deserved time with his new wife. I thought Sasha liked my dad though. I didn't think she liked me. She would laugh at my dad's boring jokes and find a reason to constantly touch him. If I was with them, her smile would seem a little forced, and it appeared like she was trying to show my dad she wanted to be on good terms with me. My dad trusted her a lot and was head over heels in love with her. My dad went back to work, his own company, and it made me apprehensive that it would be just me and Sasha at home. I stayed in my room, refusing to come out and force a conversation. I wasn't prepared for it. There was a knock on my door. I opened the door for her and asked her if she needed anything. Her arms were crossed and she was looking at me with distaste in her expression. "How old are you, Julia?" she asked. I was frowning when I told her that I was 20 years old, wondering where the conversation was going. "Don't you think you should have moved out of your father's house by now?" I stared at her for a few seconds as I replayed what she said in my head. Was she chasing me out of my own father's house? Before I could reply, she told me that she understood that I wanted to stay with my dad so I could take care of him and reduce his loneliness. She said that she was with him now and there was no need for me to remain with him. "He has me as his wife now. You're no longer needed," she emphasized. Her words were hurtful, but I refused to let her see it. I smiled and told her I'd hurt her. I knew I couldn't tell my dad. He would either not believe me or worse, take her side. It was something I had to deal with on my own. We had 2 cars, mine and Dad's. Sasha complained to my dad that she needed my car so she could move in the city without stress. My dad asked me to give her the keys, promising to get me another car soon. Sasha looked at me with a smug smile and I felt crushed within. I started to take the bus to college and it was a downgrade from how I used to go to school. I told myself that I could cope with it and put on my brave face. "I've made Sasha a shareholder in the company," my dad said over dinner. I swallowed the mouthful of spaghetti and asked, "What?" I refused to look at Sasha because I knew she would have a triumphant look on her face. "Yes, my darling." My dad reached over and squeezed Sasha's hand. "She now owns 15%. 15% was a lot in my dad's company, just a little lower than my 20%. I looked at my dad's happy face and forced out a smile. I went downstairs to the laundry room to wash my clothes that I dropped there the night before. I eyed a basket of pale yellow clothes, thinking it looked like it contained my clothes. Upon going through it, I realized they were my clothes. Someone had washed my clothes without separating the colors. A yellow sweater had been washed with the whites and I knew it was deliberate. I marched upstairs to confront Sasha. She had an evil smile on her face as she told me that it was unintentional. I had to try to keep my anger in check. She was obviously lying, but I couldn't do anything about it. The next day, I found out that all my favorite cereals had been thrown out. Sasha claimed that they were all expired. We both knew they weren't, but my dad believed her completely. What broke my resolve not to get frustrated was when I discovered that I got blocked from my dad's data plan. I had an assignment to submit and I needed an internet connection desperately. I had to haul a cab back to school so I could use Wi-Fi. I got home around 8 in the evening, drained. I planned to just crash on my bed and go to sleep. When I got to my room, I had to rub my eyes because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All my clothes were strewn on the floor, my bed, and some were hanging crookedly off the hangers. Even my underwear wasn't spared. My shoes were off the rack and were lying around. "That bitch!" I cursed. The following day, I searched for an apartment and told my dad I was moving out. He was sad, but I told him I was more than ready to stay on my own. The smile Sasha gave me as I left tempted me to punch it off her face, but I restrained myself. I pitied my dad because I was sure Sasha wasn't with him because she loved him. I couldn't do anything but watch from a distance because my dad was too emotionally dependent on her. I would visit my dad once in a while and preferred it when we went out just the two of us. A few months went by. We were supposed to go to Fort, a classy restaurant downtown, and I looked forward to it. When I got inside, I saw my dad sitting at one of the back tables, his head in his hands. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked as I sat down. "That bitch, Sasha. She left me. She took your car, documents of one of the properties I transferred to her name. She sold off her shares at my company and ran off with the money." My dad closed his eyes, swallowing hard. I wasn't surprised, but I felt angry. Angry at Sasha, angry at my dad for being too stupid in love to see Sasha for who she was. I was also angry at myself because I thought there was nothing I could have done to prevent this from happening. As I consoled my dad, I swore to myself that I would find Sasha. I would make her pay. I waited by my phone, hoping it would ring soon. I had contacted a private investigator to locate Sasha and bring me her details. I knew she couldn't have left without leaving any traces, even though it seemed that way. I sighed, thinking about my father. It had only been a month since she ran away with my dad's money, my car, and documents to one of his prime real estate. And now he had slipped into a deep depression. He really loved Sasha. He barely went to work anymore. My phone rang and I picked it up immediately. "Hello?" It was my boyfriend Nate, and he wanted to know if we were still going to hang out later in the evening. I told him I could not make it because I was still looking for Sasha. I had been seeing him less recently due to the problems Sasha caused. I had to be there for my dad. "I don't get why you should be personally responsible. You've reported to the cops. Let them handle this. You're becoming so bitter," Nate said. I shook my head. He didn't understand. I could not just sit around and hope that someday the cops would find Sasha without doing anything. I told him that once I found her, everything would be over. He hung up on me in annoyance. I was frowning at my phone when another call came in. This time, it was the private investigator. "You better have something good to tell me," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. It had been 2 weeks now, and he had not given me anything worthwhile. I was paying him a lot of money to get zero results. He told me he had found Sasha. Apparently, she was staying in a hotel in Rio, where she and my dad went for their honeymoon. She was being careful not to buy anything with her name, so it could not be traced back to her. I told him to send me the details of the hotel and her room number, and he promised to do so immediately. I smiled and thanked him before I hung up. I packed my things and booked a flight for Rio. Sasha would never know what was coming for her. I called Nate to tell him the good news. We had been dating for almost a year now, and we told each other everything. I smiled, sure that he was going to be happy for me when I told him I found Sasha. "Had a change of heart?" he asked. I told him everything the police investigator told me in full details. "That's great. Have you told the cops?" I sighed and explained to him that I was going to Rio to apprehend Sasha myself. Nate sounded disappointed in me and said that the incident had changed me into someone else. He said I was no longer the person he fell in love with. When I tried to tell him my plan, he didn't want to listen and told me to never call him again. My heart was broke as I ended the call, and I told myself that once I was back from Rio, I would go to Nate and everything would be resolved. My flight to Rio was spent with me perfecting my plan till I was sure nothing would go wrong. I got to the hotel and went to the front desk. "I have a delivery for Sasha Raymond." I showed the receptionist a phony ID and business card, and she directed me to Sasha's room. I pulled my face cap low and knocked on the door before yelling that I had a package for her. She told me to come in, and I could hardly keep myself from smiling. I entered and turned around quickly to lock the door. Sasha stood up, wondering what was going on. When I turned around and she saw my face, her face paled. She shrank back and ran to dive for the telephone near her bed. I brought out a fake gun and told her to raise her hands up. She complied, trembling. "Julie, wait, we can talk this through." I didn't want to listen to her ramblings, so I told her to shut up. "I always knew you were a horrible person." Sasha got bold and put her hands down. "And so what? Did you think I could love an old and slow man like your father and choose to stay with him?" She laughed. "You can't do anything to me. They'll trace it back to you. Just go back home and cry to your daddy, you stupid girl." I got furious, but managed to clamp my anger down. I smiled at her. She had no idea I was recording our entire conversation. When I confronted her about running away with my dad's money, she was so proud of herself and explained in detail how she duped my dad. There was a tiny video camera in front of my cap, and it captured everything Sasha was saying. "Again, Julia, stop being a cunt. There's nothing you or anybody else can do about it." I frowned at her and shook my head in regret. I made sure I looked crestfallen and went out of the room. I went to give the police the video and recording after I edited it so it could not implicate me. They arrested Sasha because they now had more than enough evidence and knew her location. During the trial, my dad stood as a witness and got teary as he recounted the story. I felt pity for him as he broke down in tears when Sasha was taken away. She looked at him with so much distaste, and I wanted to punch it off her face. I consoled my dad afterwards, and he asked if I could move back with him. I sadly told him no. It was time for me to stay on my own. I promised him I would come over from time to time and not be far away. I had been trying to reach Nate since I got back from Rio, but he had been ignoring my calls. Today, I decided that I would go to his place immediately after the trial. I drove to his place, rehearsing all I would say on the way. If I could make him understand why I had to go after Sasha myself, he would see where I was coming from. I knocked on his door, and he opened the door after a few seconds. He looked at me with a bored expression. "Nate, why have you been ignoring me?" He sighed and told me that it was time for us to end our relationship. He said he never realized how much of a vengeful person I was. Even when I explained to him that I did nothing to Sasha and only got evidence for the police, he was immovable in his decision. I begged him to change his mind, but he was adamant. He told me to leave and promptly closed the door in my face. I spent the night crying. Even though I got the revenge I wanted, I lost something precious to me.
As I walked home, I glanced back nervously. I wasn't sure if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I could have sworn that man had been following me since I left work. He took the same turns I did, and he seemed to be in no hurry to walk past me. It was a little after 7 in the evening, and people were walking around the city. Maybe he was just living near my place. I was really tired and was in no mood for anything to ruin the rest of my day. I lived in an apartment that I paid for by myself. I worked in a bank and was slowly rising up the ranks. I was planning to save up and buy my own place soon. I've always liked to have a house near the woods, surrounded by nature. I got to the building where I lived and I looked back. The man was still behind me. I hoped he didn't live in the same building with me. I entered and risked one more glance back. He passed the building and I heaved a sigh of relief. It was just a false alarm. I took the stairs to my apartment on the 3rd floor so I could get a little bit of exercise. I'd been sitting behind my desk all day. It was Friday and I was looking forward to spending my weekend just resting in. That night, I went to sleep early so that I could get up for my morning jog. My alarm woke me up and I got ready to get out for my jog. I had been jogging for about 15 minutes with headphones blaring music into my ears when all of a sudden I felt the hair at the back of my neck rising. It was the same feeling I'd had when I thought that man was following me. I casually removed my headphones and I looked back. I almost tripped when I saw the same man jogging behind me. Twice in the space of 2 days didn't feel like a coincidence. I faced forward and I concentrated on breathing normally. I ended my run earlier because I just didn't feel comfortable and I walked back to my apartment. I looked back and was glad when I saw that he wasn't following me. He looked huge and had impressive looking muscles. His face looked familiar, but I wasn't sure if I had met someone like him before. I feel like I would remember that. I got home and went to take a quick shower. As I plopped down on my couch to watch some TV, there was a knock at my door. I opened the door thinking it was one of my neighbors, but it was that man that had been following me. I tried to shut the door quickly, but he put his foot in the front. He pushed me in and I fell down on the floor. He came in and closed the door, grinning down at me. "Is someone there?" I called out, trying to crawl away from him. He came over to me and he turned me around. I struggled against him, but he was just too strong. He tied my hands with some rope that he had in his pocket and he placed me on the sofa. "Always not seeing me? I've been in love with you since high school, but no one ever notices the guy who's not attractive. I was in your class, Abby, but no one pays attention to Cam except to bully him." I was crying now and I didn't care about his story. I just wanted to be free. I struggled against the ropes unsuccessfully. I recognized him now. He was the weird kid of the class, the one that no one ever talked to and was always by himself. But he was tiny and he always got bullied. Now he was looking really big. "I loved you, but you never had eyes for me." He looked at me with crazed eyes and spread his arms wide. "Look at me now. Do you like me now?" I closed my eyes and turned away from him. He dragged my face back to his. "Look at me. I did everything for you." His eyes were scary, and I tried to shove down my fear. I stared at him and had an idea. "I'm sorry, Cam. I didn't realize. I see it now. I see you." I sniffed and I hoped he bought it. I tried to look as genuine as possible so he could believe me. He became gentle and he smiled at me. I continued to act like I liked him. I asked him to untie my hands and he did so immediately. I heaved a sigh of relief and rubbed my wrist. "I'm glad you want me now, Abby. I've waited so long for this." He ran his hands through my hair and he grinned at me. He brought his hand and cupped my face. I tried not to flinch and I leaned into the touch. I smiled at him and I hugged him since he had already freed my hands. I glanced towards the door of my apartment. I thought if I ran really fast I could escape before he caught me. So I stood up and I told him, "I'm sorry." I told him that he should have just come up to me in high school. I would have listened to him. He believed me, and he said he was sorry, but he knew he didn't deserve me. That was why he approached me now that he was sure I would be proud of him. I nodded like I understood. I started coughing and gasped out like I needed water. His eyes looked panicked, and he rushed to my kitchen to get water. I wasted no time in making a run for it. I dashed out the door and flew down the stairs, screaming for help. Cam yelled, and I heard him run after me. I was already downstairs and dissolved in hysterics, trying to explain to my neighbor on the first floor. His name was Tom, and I told him that I was being threatened. Cam got downstairs and let out a growl when he saw me. I shrieked and I hid behind Tom. He was a big man that no one ever wanted to mess with. As Cam ran for me, Tom landed a massive punch on his face. Cam laughed. "I've waited this long for her. No one can separate us. No one." He punched Tom by the side of his face and knocked him out. I was shocked. Then, out of nowhere, the cops showed up. "Hands up!" Cam still dove for me and one of the cops shot him on his leg. He fell down with a shout and still crawled for me. He got handcuffed and carted away. I was trembling where I was standing, and I needed some time to calm down before I gave the cops my statement. Cam was taken to a mental facility where he would spend a long time. I went back to work, and I never went out for a jog again. I wasn't able to put the incident behind me soon enough.